A political gamble that paid off. Shinzo Abe's coalition swept to election victory in Japan. And the Prime Minister is now eyeing a revision of the country's pacifist constitution. But what would that mean for Japan and this volatile region? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Japan's Prime Minister took a gamble when he called early elections this year, but that gamble paid off on Sunday when Shinzo Abe's party and coalition partner won more than two-thirds of the seats in Parliament. He says it's a vote of confidence from the public, one he sees as a green light to change Japan's pacifist constitution. Abe is particularly keen on the move given the threat posed by nearby North Korea. But what would a stronger Japanese military mean for the region? We get to our guests in just a moment. But first, Sarah Clark has this report from Tokyo.
It was the election result Shinzo Abe had hoped for. His Liberal Democratic Party and coalition partner won 312 of the 465 seats, delivering them a two-thirds majority in Parliament. North Korea played a central role in his campaign, and Abe wants to strengthen diplomatic channels, pledging greater international cooperation.
We will conduct strong diplomacy as tensions over North Korea are increasing. On the 5th of next month, President Trump is scheduled to visit Japan. He kindly called me by phone already today, and when he visits, we will spend time discussing the issues of North Korea and aim to confirm our close alliance.
Voters weren't just focused on North Korea in this election, but some felt opposition parties failed to provide them with an alternative agenda to Abe's that was worth voting for.
Opposition parties need to become stronger, and the result reflected many people's wish to see that happen.
Instead of supporting the Liberal Democratic Party actively, I think voters didn't have any choice.
The newly formed Party of Hope, which many considered was the major threat, didn't get as many seats as expected. The other new party on the bloc, the Constitutional Democratic Party, has become the main opposition, tripling the number of seats in the lower house.
Shinzo Abe will see this election victory as a strong mandate to deliver on his reform agenda and act on his lifelong mission to revise Japan's pacifist constitution and give the country's self-defence forces a more active role. But the issue is controversial and voters are divided over constitutional change.
With the escalating nuclear threat from North Korea, Abe will be hoping it's enough to convince voters to back his campaign to allow Japan's military to respond to direct threats. But any change to the constitution requires approval first by two-thirds of both the upper and lower house, and then a public referendum. Sarah Clark, Al Jazeera, Tokyo.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our guests now. Joining us in Singapore, Kotaro Tamura. He is an Asia Fellow for the Milken Institute and former Japanese senator. In Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz, Director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. And in Nice, Alessio Patalano, who's a senior lecturer in Department of War Studies at King's College London. He is also the author of Post-War Japan as a Sea Power. Very warm welcome to all of you. Kotaro Tamura, why do you think Abe won?
So Prime Minister Abe would like to change the course of the Japan. So he would like to play a bigger role in the world, especially in Asia, in order to regain the stability, which, in a sense, currently lost because of the Korean Peninsula and the rise of China, unpredictability happening in the U.S. politics.
Alessio Patalano, what is your view about what happened? Did Typhoon land keep people away, or did North Korea drive them to the polls?
I think it's probably the latter. The North Korean challenge presented itself as an ideal context for Prime Minister Abe, not only to call the snap election, but also to provide a platform for his message to just come across as stronger as those of his opponents. So in that sense, the security landscape and the progressive deterioration of Northeast Asian context were ideal conditions for Prime Minister Abe to project himself as the man that would probably be the ideal person to deal with the current situation.
Richard Weitz, is he seen from there as the ideal person to deal with the current situation?
Yes, in the sense that he, at least from the White House, he's probably President Trump's one of his closest foreign allies. I think a couple other factors, though, help contribute to the victory independent of relations with the U.S. or Korea. I think, in particular, the structural factors. The Japanese, like the British and the Americans, have a first-past-the-post system. So in this case, when the opposition parties are divided and weak, it amplifies the electoral victory, since you just need a majority in each electoral district to win. I think the true test of his popularity will come if he goes ahead with his proposal to try and change the Constitution, because I think that will test the strength of his coalition, and then he'll need a popular majority to approve it.
You touched on a key word, the Constitution, changing it, and I'm just wondering how big a thing, Kotaro, it is for people there as it is for the rest of the world, the Constitution, changing this pacifist Constitution. What role did it play, do you think, in these elections?
So Japanese Constitution is very hard to amend. Super majority is needed in both houses, and the simple majority needed for the referendum. So there's many super politicians try to make it happen in last 70 years, but nobody made it. But interestingly, he regained the supermajority again, the lower house, and although he has incoming upper house election in 2 years, so far he has supermajority in both houses. But as somebody mentioned, general public sentiment toward amendment is not ready yet, I think. So it's still a long shot. He needs more work. He needs to convince general public. But due to the North Korean issues, the general public sentiment is gradually understanding Japan has to do more for its own defense.
Now, Japan's pacifist constitution was drafted by the US after World War II, but what exactly does it mean? The relevant clause here is known as Article 9. It calls for complete renunciation of war. Literally, that means Japan shouldn't have any armed forces, but it does. Successive governments have interpreted the constitution to allow a self-defense military. Abe has pushed for an even broader interpretation. He passed a law 2 years ago that authorizes overseas military missions for, quote, collective self-defense alongside Japan's allies. He's also pushed to change the constitution to further legitimize the military. But that can only happen after a referendum. And the people aren't necessarily on board. Recent polls show they are split on changing the charter. Richard, it's going to be a complicated matter. I mean, with the aging population, we're not going to suddenly see old women on the front line in Afghanistan in the next couple of weeks, for example. What sort of conversation would the US like to see happening before we see any changes?
As your package pointed out, there have been a series of changes that have taken place within the existing Constitution through an interpretation and changes in executive policy, plus laws passed by the Parliament, that have already enhanced the Japanese role in self-defense, in partnership with the U.S., and contributing to international security. But the thinking is there's still a few more steps we'd like to see, at least in the U.S. national security community. Not only are we dealing with difficult challenges from North Korea, but there's also challenges from China and Russia, and transnational challenges such as migration or terrorism and so on. So we'd still like to see a little more cooperation, perhaps in missile defense, perhaps in joint operations in third countries and so on. And that, though, is a challenge. And so both governments, I think, are prepared, if this is not possible, to continue to expand their cooperation even short of an amendment.
Alessio, Japan, I mean, you've written about it as a sea power, pretty formidable? Does it need to beef up its defences? Does it need to get with the times? Is this anachronistic and therefore time for change?
No, I don't think it's anachronistic. I'd like to make a preliminary point, though. The Constitution does not say that Japan cannot possess armed forces. The Constitution rejects the use of force as a means of state to solve international disputes, and to that extent to maintain military power for waging war. These are two very different things. With this preliminary consideration done, I think Japan already possesses a considerable amount of military power, but it is one that is very much designed around the important sort of component of the US-Japan alliance and how it contributes to Japanese national defense and security. So within this context, I think that the initiatives that have been taking place over the last few years and have accelerated with the security legislations as they were passed in 2015, they are about empowering Japanese governments to have a more relevant use of the capabilities at their disposal in order to meet the security challenges that surround Japan, not just in very difficult crisis times, which was the setup during the Cold War, but during what the Ministry of Defense calls as the gray zone scenarios. That is, peacetime, relatively complex security scenarios, as it would be a situation of a missile crisis coming from North Korea, or as it's been in recent times, over the greater military assertiveness conducted by China in the Sea of Japan and the East China Sea. So we're talking about empowering the states rather than fundamentally changing a military posture.
Kotaro, you wanted to say something?
So don't forget, we are aging and shrinking population. So we are spending only 1% for our defense. We are spent 1% of the GDP on our defense. 25% of our GDP invested into social security, not the national security. So we lost 3 million people in the last war. But if these things continue shrinking and aging population, we will be losing 50 million population in this year, in this century. So, Japan cannot build up we are not allowed to.
I mean, you would think in a way that that's almost a greater threat, isn't it? I mean, that's a real internal threat to the country, the economy.
Yeah. So our biggest challenge is the population. So Prime Minister Abe is a realist. He's not a militarist. He's not the right wing. He's a realist. I used to be an economic advisor to him. So, the constitutional amendment is nothing but a tool or process to play a bigger role. So he will choose not only building a more defense, but also collaboration with China, more engagement with ASEAN, putting India as a counterbalance. So I think that's a more real thing it's going to happening in this region.
Now, Abe was Prime Minister for just 1 year in 2006, but since being re-elected in 2012, he's had a lot of political success, and that's largely attributed to his economic policy known as Abenomics. It's helped Japan turn its stagnant economy around after 2 decades of deflation. The policy consists of 3 so-called arrows. The first is printing more money to trigger a little bit of much-needed inflation and make Japanese exports more attractive to foreign markets. The second arrow is new government spending programs to encourage consumers to buy. And the third is reforming corporate regulations to make Japanese businesses more competitive. That included making it easier for companies to hire and fire workers. 2 years ago, the Prime Minister announced Abenomics 2.0, aimed at reversing the country's demographic decline by boosting the birth rate and expanding social security. Do you think that'll work, Alessio?
I think it will. However, we need to be careful. And I think Kentaro's point was very important in this respect. Even if you have a reverse of the current situation in terms of birth rates, and stabilizing the decline of the population, that does not automatically translate into people joining automatically more the military. Put it this way, over the past few years, we've seen a number of crises coming Japan's way, and that has not changed the recruitment data for the self-defense forces, which means that the Japanese society, whilst it understands much better the importance of the self-defense role of the forces and the role they have in society, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to rush to join their ranks in order to contribute to Japanese security. I think the point of the Abenomics and the broader Abe reforms are about combining greater economic, diplomatic, and also military means as tools of statecraft in order to increase the stability of Japanese security surrounding and the role of Japan's in it.
So we're having a renewed look at the military, the Constitution, Richard, this aging population. The US withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is that going to aid or hinder Japan in succeeding in conquering those goals, getting to those goals?
Well, right. The Japanese government under Abe is still committed to the TPP, whereas the Trump administration at most would be considered a bilateral trade partnership. And I think this could be a divisive issue when they meet next month. As you know, President Trump is going to visit several Asian countries in November, including Japan. And I think that the Japanese still would like the U.S. to return to the TPP, but it would have to be after a post-Trump administration. So Abe may decide just to postpone this issue. In terms of how it helps the economy, it's going to help, obviously, some sectors in the Japanese economy and hurt others. And that's a very delicate political issue that we also face in the United States and other countries.
Kotaro, how much does he have to deal? I mean, obviously, the economy, it's always an important factor, regardless of where you are. But to push the Constitution or changing the Constitution through, how important is it in dealing with the economy at the same time? Because not everybody's on board. We've seen protests in the past. Many people feel that, I mean, the psychological impact of changing the Constitution is big.
Yes, you made a point. So in order to get a majority in the referendum, we have to make general public happy. So happy means economically happy. So right now, amazingly, Japan is the fastest growing economy among G7. So thanks to the Abenomics and thanks to the stock price, going up 15 days in a row, that's never happened in the Japanese stock market history. So that's pushed Prime Minister Abe's landslide win this time. So, and in order to counter the aging and the shrinking population, we have to deal with that. And in order to secure the national security, we have to deal with China. So China, Japan, more economic collaboration. Recently, Prime Minister Abe officially first time mentioned he would like to cooperate to the One Belt, One Road. And already so many Japanese manufacturing companies, trading houses, are into that One Belt, One Road plan initiated by Chinese. So, and Prime Minister Abe, for the first time, legalizing casino, building a huge integral resort, implemented in casino. So that is for Chinese wealthy people visiting us. One of the biggest achievements.
So are you saying, sorry, if I can just jump in here, that Abe, just like his father, has been very good at stirring nationalistic pride, and that's obviously very important?
So far, so good. Yes, so far it is a light way to mention but he tried to make it happen. But right now, he's now leaning to the realistic, way of thinking. So China is much bigger than us. China is seemingly unstoppable, but China also needs our help, our cooperation. So Abe is gradually, trying to be more cooperative with China, and China has a pain in the neck, North Korea, and we share the same problem. So we start talking. After Trump visit, Prime Minister is planning to have a summit meeting with Chinese leader for the first time in several years. Not in the international arena, one by one, face to face. So that is the, Abe's real face. He's not the country pride man anymore. He's now convincing general public we have to deal with China in different way, realistic way. Although we compete in a sense, but we have to collaborate. So that's the way Abe will do from now.
Richard, how threatened do you see Japan at the moment? I mean, how secure or insecure is it in light of regional developments when it comes to its relationship with China and South Korea and the ripple effects of possibly changing the Constitution, how that'll play into it?
Right. It's an interesting dynamic. And so the main threats that Japan is facing is the near-term North Korea, long-term China, and the Russia threat is a legacy of the Cold War and how that ended. It still persists, but it's declining. And the thinking is that Abe was going to try and reach a deal with Russia in order to reduce the number of potential challenges, brings maybe some kind of deal over the disputed islands, and that would allow both countries to focus a bit more on the rise of China. The constitutional reform, though, it's tricky. It's something the U.S. wants, but it's certainly going to alarm the Chinese. And you mentioned the South Koreans. They're not enthusiastic about this, and then the North Koreans neither. But in a way, these countries already have their views of Abe, and I'm not sure he would lose much by pushing for the reform. But I think the key question is what's going to happen on the Russia front. If the Trump administration, unlike the Obama administration, is not opposed to this reconciliation. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
What do you make of that, Alessio? How do you think that relationship is going to evolve? And do you see Japan looking for new allies in the region?
So let me take you the question in reverse. Is Japan looking for new partners? Of course it is. In fact, I would say that the greatest revolution that has been brought about by particularly the second Abe administration, but what could stretch back and see the seeds of this already being planted in the first Abe administration, is the ability for Japan as a security provider to start looking at other partners in addition to the United States. We can look out there at Australia and the incredible sort of amount of progress there. India, even South Korea. We should not forget that there has been some important improvements, particularly on the security side, notwithstanding some initial bumps on the road between the two countries, but well beyond that, also reaching out to international organizations like NATO. NATO and Japan have been working very closely in conducting the counter-piracy operations in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden, and with countries like France and the UK, where the defense and security cooperation has been substantially upgraded. So this is all part of a widening agenda of a Japan that is trying to be much more embedded within the international community in order to tackle not only transnational type of issues, as it could have been the counter-piracy back in the Indian Ocean, but also to attract the attention of other actors towards East Asian security challenges. In this respect, I think also Prime Minister Abe has a personal sort of investment into trying to make the relationship with Russia work better. So far, the results have been mixed. But on the other hand, President Putin has very little incentive to increase the relationship with Japan, particularly in a context whereby Japan has been, outside of the context of major European powers, one of the main sort of implementers of sanctions against Russia. So Japan is in a very difficult position to try to keep up a pace with the position of other Western powers in this respect, but at the same time sharing a difficult relationship with Russia.
Richard, any idea what Donald Trump is going to be saying to Abe when they meet up in 10 days' time? What's the conversation?
It's clear they're going to talk about North Korea, as I think they did when Trump congratulated Abe in his phone call. They probably will talk about China, since the relationship with both countries is in flux. They may talk about Russia for the reasons we went into. If they talk about trade, I'm not sure what kind of progress we'll see. So I think the public statements, the public declarations are going to emphasize the security partnership, the looking forward, the close relationship between the two countries, as is traditionally the case.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for talking us through what potentially could be a very different Japan in the future. Big thanks to our guests, Kotaro, Tamura, Richard Weitz, and Alessio Patalano. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Jane Dutton, and the rest of the team, goodbye. Thanks for watching.